The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe episode 60 Paradox as Teacher, Holding Contradictions Without Collapse. Welcome back to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. We live in a world that demands clarity. We are told to choose sides, to resolve tensions, to fix contradictions as if they were errors in the system. But life is not so neat. To be human is to live in paradox. We want freedom, yet we crave safety. We long for intimacy, yet fear being fully seen. We cling to meaning, even as we know life is fragile and impermanent. Most of us are taught to collapse these tensions, to resolve them quickly, to make the discomfort go away. But what if paradox itself is a teacher? What if the contradiction isn't a flaw to be ironed out, but the very ground on which wholeness grows? In this episode, we'll explore why culture struggles with contradiction and binary thinking, how tension is not a weakness but a sign of aliveness, why paradox deepens meaning and spiritual growth, how contradiction can be a fertile space for creativity, what it means to hold paradox in a relationship with others, and how wholeness itself may mean carrying contradictions without collapse. Paradox doesn't weaken us, it shapes us, and the freedom we seek may lie not in resolution, but in learning to hold the knot without cutting it loose. Let's begin. The weight of either or. From childhood, we are taught to live by the logic of either, or things are either good or bad, right or wrong, a success or a failure. The demand is to choose, to simplify contradictions into clarity. At first, this feels safe. Either or thinking gives us control, but over time it becomes a burden. Life rarely fits into clean categories, and when it doesn't, we feel broken or guilty, as though we've failed at clarity. This is the weight of either or. It demands we collapse paradox into a single answer, even when both are true. Themes: the tyranny of binaries. Society enforces binary categories: male, female, success, failure, strength, weakness. The richness of life gets flattened. Contradiction as error. We are taught that contradictions signal failure, that to be conflicted means something is wrong with us. The cost of simplification. Binary thinking provides temporary clarity, but long-term fragmentation. We cut away parts of ourselves to fit one side, beginning to question. The first step toward living paradoxically is to notice how often we are pressured to choose when both truths exist. Attributes: rigidity. Binaries create brittle identities that shatter when life contradicts them. Shame. Contradictions make us feel fraudulent or inconsistent. Fragmentation. Cutting off one side of a paradox fractures wholeness. Invitation. Paradox asks us to live beyond binaries into a fuller truth. The broken scale. Imagine a set of scales. On one side sits freedom, on the other safety. The culture of either, or tells us we must tip the scale one way or the other. But life refuses to balance neatly. The scale breaks, not because we've failed, but because it was never designed to hold paradox. The task is not to fix the scale, but to step beyond it. I've felt the weight of either or many times. Be strong or be weak, be right or be wrong, be certain or be lost. In each case, the demand to choose left me cut off from some part of myself. When I was younger, I thought wholeness meant clarity, that to live with contradiction meant I was failing at authenticity. But over time, I saw that the contradictions weren't evidence of failure, they were evidence of life. The problem was never the paradox itself. The problem was the pressure to collapse it into either or. This binary framing isn't just personal, it's cultural. We are surrounded by it, and it shapes how we see ourselves. Breaking that frame is the first act of freedom. Personal reflection. I've carried the weight of either or many times in my own life. Growing up, I often felt torn between two truths that refused to reconcile. Part of me wanted to speak out, to say what I really thought, but another part feared the consequences of being misunderstood or dismissed. It always felt like I had to choose. Either I stayed silent to be safe, or I spoke and risked rejection. Later, I realized this tension was everywhere, not just in me, but in the world around me. People acting strong while secretly exhausted. Communities demanded certainty when everyone privately carried doubts. The message was always the same: pick a side, settle the contradiction, don't live in between. For years, I mistook that pressure for truth. I thought authenticity meant cutting off half of myself to prove I was real. But in time, I saw the opposite. My contradictions didn't make me false, they made me human. Psychological and philosophical insight. At the individual level, Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance explains why contradictions feel uncomfortable. Our minds seek consistency, so a paradox feels like an error. But learning to tolerate dissonance can expand resilience, letting us hold two truths without collapsing into one. At the group level, social identity theory shows how communities enforce binaries to maintain cohesion. Groups define themselves as us against them. Yet this simplification excludes complexity, silences nuance, and fractures those who don't fit. Groups that allow paradox, for example, communities that embrace doubt and diversity, tend to be healthier and more adaptive. At the societal level, philosophy points to the danger of binaries. Hegel showed how contradiction is the engine of history, thesis, and antithesis driving synthesis. Societies that suppress paradox stagnate, while those that wrestle with contradiction evolve. When cultures demand purity and certainty, they suffocate. When they hold paradox, they grow. Across all levels, the weight of either or is real, but it is not inevitable. Paradox invites us to step off the broken scale. Embodiment, prompt, or practice. Think of one contradiction you live with right now: freedom and safety, closeness and independence, rest and ambition. Instead of collapsing it into one choice, place both truths in your hands. Feel their weight. Breathe into the tension. Notice what shifts when you don't force resolution. Insight prompt. Where in your life are you carrying the weight of either, or what would happen if you allowed both sides to be true, even if they don't resolve neatly? Integration moment. The weight of either or comes from the belief that contradictions are errors to be solved. But paradox is not error, it's evidence of life. Integration means seeing that wholeness is not clarity, but the capacity to hold both truths without collapse. Seed to plant paradox is not a flaw. It is the teacher waiting at the edge of either, or living with tension. Most of us are taught that contradictions are unbearable. If we feel pulled in opposite directions, we assume something is wrong. The tension is treated as a signal to resolve quickly. Make a decision, pick a side, shut down the discomfort. But paradox isn't meant to be solved like a puzzle. It's meant to be lived. The tension itself is the space where growth happens. Learning to inhabit that space, without rushing to collapse it, is the beginning of a paradox as a teacher. Themes discomfort as signal tension feels uncomfortable because it stretches us beyond certainty. Holding without resolution. The capacity to hold contradiction is a deeper form of strength than collapsing it. Paradox as aliveness. When opposites pull on us, it shows that we are alive, engaged, becoming. Learning the stretch wholeness doesn't come from erasing the pull, but from stretching wide enough to contain it. Attributes discomfort. Tension creates unease, but unease signals growth. Patience. Living paradox means slowing down the impulse to resolve. Resilience. The ability to hold opposites without collapse strengthens identity. Aliveness. Paradox signals we are touching something real and vital. The tightrope and the net. Imagine walking a tightrope. Below you is a net. The paradox is that both are true. You are at risk of falling, and you are also held. If you fixate on only one, you lose your balance. If you can hold both truths at once, you walk with steadiness. Tension is uncomfortable. Every instinct tells us to resolve it, to decide. But when we rush, we often amputate a truth that still matters. I've learned that sitting in tension takes more strength than collapsing it. It demands presence, the ability to breathe while pulled in opposite directions. There is no neat resolution, no final answer. But there is growth. Paradox stretches us wider than clarity ever could. It asks us to hold both fear and courage, grief and joy, doubt and faith, and to live anyway. Personal reflection. I can remember times when I felt completely torn, wanting to rest but feeling driven to push forward, wanting to connect deeply with others but fearing being consumed or misunderstood. Each time, I thought I had to choose one side and abandon the other. But whenever I chose, something felt missing. It wasn't until I began to sit inside the tension, to admit both were true, that I noticed a shift. The tension didn't vanish, but it became bearable. It was almost as if the contradiction itself carried energy. Instead of trying to resolve it, I started to see it as something to breathe into. The hardest part has always been resisting the urge to fix it quickly. But over time, I've come to recognize that tension isn't failure. It's life stretching me open. Psychological and philosophical insight. At the individual level, Carl Jung spoke of the tension of opposites as the crucible of transformation. He believed that psychological growth happens not by eliminating one pole, but by holding the conflict until something new emerges, the transcendent function. For example, a person caught between independence and intimacy may, over time, discover new ways of relating that honor both needs. At the group level, dialectical thinking offers another perspective. In groups, contradictions often appear as polarized positions, one side demanding change, the other defending tradition. If a group can tolerate the tension without collapsing into one side, it can generate creative solutions. Many breakthroughs in science, art, and politics come from this kind of dialectical tension. At the societal level, Eastern traditions like Taoism embrace paradox as natural. The yin-yang symbol embodies this. Each contains the seed of its opposite, and harmony comes not from erasing tension, but from balancing it. Societies that can hold paradox, embracing tradition while innovating, for instance, tend to be more resilient than those that force a single truth. Across all levels, the lesson is the same. Tension is not weakness. It is the birthplace of transformation. Embodiment, prompt, or practice. Sit quietly and bring to mind a contradiction you are living right now. Place one hand on your chest and one on your belly. With each inhale, imagine drawing in one side of the paradox. With each exhale, imagine holding the other. Notice what it feels like to contain both in your body without needing resolution. Insight prompt. What tension in your life have you been trying to resolve too quickly? What might shift if you allowed yourself to hold it longer, as if it had something to teach you? Integration moment. Living with tension doesn't mean paralysis. It means recognizing that wholeness is not clarity, but capacity. The wider we stretch to hold contradiction, the deeper our wholeness becomes. Seed to plant. The tension you carry isn't a mistake. It may be the place where life is teaching you to grow. Paradox as path. When contradictions surface in our lives, the reflex is to eliminate them. We want resolution, not tension, clarity, not confusion. Yet paradox is stubborn. It lingers, resists explanation, and demands something of us. For many, this feels unbearable. The mind wants to simplify, either this or that, never both. But paradox whispers a different truth. Life is rarely either or, it is both, and when we stop treating paradox as a glitch to be solved, we start to see it as a teacher. Paradox is not the enemy of meaning. It is the path to meaning. Themes paradox as teacher. Instead of removing contradictions, paradox asks us to learn from them. It pushes us to grow wider than one answer. Depth through contradiction. Some of life's richest experiences, love, grief, faith, and creativity, contain contradictions at their core. Trust in the unresolved living paradox requires faith, not in tidy solutions, but in the possibility that unresolved tensions still lead us forward. Transformation in the not contradictions can generate new forms of understanding, not through resolution, but through transformation. Attributes depth. Paradox drags us beneath surface level clarity into something more profound. Trust. Holding paradox requires confidence that truth can live in tension. Creativity. New insights emerge when opposites refuse to collapse. Humility. Paradox humbles us, reminding us that certainty is rarely the whole story. The knot that holds a knot in a rope can appear to be a problem, twisted, stuck, or resistant. Our instinct is to undo it. But sometimes the knot is the very thing keeping the rope from unraveling. Without it, the rope would fall apart. Paradox works like this. It frustrates us, tangles us, yet holds us. I've come to see paradox as a path rather than a block. Every time I've met a contradiction in life, my instinct was to cut through it, to tidy it away. But some contradictions can't be untangled. They must be carried. Take love, for instance. To love is to risk loss. Joy and grief are tied in the same knot. You cannot have one without the other. Yet instead of diminishing love, that contradiction deepens it. Love is richer because of the paradox. Or take courage. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the presence of fear and action together. If you remove fear, courage dissolves into ease. It's a paradox, fear and bravery coexisting, that gives courage its power. Even silence and speech reveal paradox. At times, silence protects what words would break. At other times, silence suffocates and only speech frees. The paradox is that both silence and speech can be true, depending on the moment. To honor both is to learn timing, discernment, and depth. Over and over, I've discovered that paradox doesn't weaken life. It strengthens it. Personal reflection I've lived through paradoxes that at the time felt like contradictions I had to resolve. Wanting independence but craving intimacy. Speaking with conviction while harboring doubt. Feeling broken while also sensing resilience stirring underneath. In the past, I thought these tensions revealed weakness or confusion. I felt pressured to collapse them, to decide to define myself in one way or the other. But whenever I did, something was lost. The turning point came when I realized that the paradoxes weren't mistakes. They were the path itself. My longing for freedom and my desire for connection weren't enemies. They were two truths shaping me at once. My doubt and my conviction didn't cancel each other. They gave me humility to keep searching while still standing for what mattered. Paradox is uncomfortable, yes, but it has been the most faithful teacher in my life. Psychological and philosophical insight. At the individual level, Søren Kierkegaard described faith as a paradox, the simultaneous belief in the absurd and the eternal. To live in faith is not to resolve the contradiction, but to inhabit it. For individuals, this shows up in moments where we must hold opposites, to grieve and still be grateful, to fear and still act, to doubt and still trust. The paradox does not weaken the individual. It makes their living deeper. At the group level, Zen Buddhism shows us how paradox can break open rigid thinking. Koans, what is the sound of one hand clapping, seem nonsensical, but their purpose is to exhaust logic and force the mind into a deeper awareness. Groups practicing Zen dialogue don't try to solve the paradox. They sit in it together, letting it reframe consciousness. This collective experience shows that paradox can build not just individual insight, but communal depth. At the societal level, Hegel's dialectic reminds us that history itself is driven by paradox, thesis and antithesis colliding, producing synthesis. Societies that deny contradiction stagnate, repeating brittle certainties. Those that wrestle with paradox, for instance, holding tradition and innovation in dialogue, evolve. Even political and cultural upheavals reveal paradox at work. The demand for change and the fear of change are not enemies but forces that, when held together, generate progress. These perspectives show that paradox is not a deadlock. It is the path forward, whether in a single life, a group, or an entire culture. Embodiment, prompt, or practice, bring to mind one paradox you are living. Perhaps freedom and safety, closeness and independence, rest and ambition. Instead of resolving, speak aloud. Both are true. Both belong. Sit with your body's reaction, discomfort, release, and resistance. Notice what shifts when you affirm paradox as a valid way of being. Insight prompt, think of a paradox in your life that you've been trying to solve. What might change if you stopped treating it as a problem and started treating it as a teacher? Integration moment. Paradox is not the end of clarity. It is the beginning of depth. To live with paradox is to accept that life is not smaller than you think, but larger, too large to fit into tidy resolutions. When you live paradox as path, you discover truths that cannot exist in any other way. Seed to plant. The contradictions you carry may not be problems to fix. They may be the knots that hold your life together, the fertile space between. We've been taught to treat the space between opposites as dangerous ground. Indecision, confusion, paralysis. To be caught between two truths often feels like failure, as though we are weak or broken for not choosing. But what if the in-between is not barren at all? What if it is fertile? The paradox doesn't only stretch us, it can generate. The pull of opposites creates tension, and tension creates possibility. The very space we fear, that gap between this and that, may be the soil where transformation takes root. Themes paradox as creative tension, contradictions hold energy. Instead of collapsing it, we can channel it. The fertile in-between, the middle is not emptiness. It's where opposites mingle and newness emerges. Holding and playing. To sit in paradox is to enter a space of play, experimenting, exploring, trying on truths. Birth through tension. Much of what we call creation in art, philosophy, science, and healing arises from paradox. Attributes energy. Paradox produces a charge like two magnetic poles. Possibility. New forms exist in the overlap between contradictions. Playfulness. We can explore without needing a fixed resolution. Creation. Paradox births insights and transformations that neither pole alone could offer. The field of two suns. Imagine a field with two suns. Each casts shadows in opposite directions. At first, the doubling feels disorienting. Where is the true light? But the more you look, the more you notice textures, colors, and depths you could never see under one sun alone. Paradox illuminates like that. It doesn't give clarity in the way we expect, but it shows us truths we couldn't have imagined otherwise. Whenever I felt stretched between opposites, my first instinct was to collapse the tension, to pick one side and silence the other. Belonging or independence, rest or ambition, freedom or safety. But whenever I forced resolution, I felt smaller. It was only when I lingered in the space between that uncomfortable, unresolved in-betweenness that something opened. Sometimes it was a new idea, sometimes a new part of myself, sometimes a new way forward I couldn't have seen if I had chosen too quickly. It's strange to realize that the most uncomfortable spaces are often the most fertile. Creativity, growth, and healing don't come from certainty. They come from paradox. Personal reflection. I've known this in my own creative work. Often, I sit at the edge of two impulses, the desire to speak simply and directly, and the desire to go deep and complex. For years, I thought I had to pick, be the plain speaker or the philosopher. But the best of my work has emerged in the overlap, from inhabiting both at once. I've also felt it in relationships. There were times I wanted closeness, but also feared losing myself. I used to believe I had to choose one, disappear into intimacy, or wall myself off for independence. Neither felt right. It was only in the uncomfortable space between, where I held both, that I began to discover a deeper way of relating. And spiritually, I felt both doubt and faith alive in me at once. In the past, I treated doubt as betrayal and faith as something fragile. Now I see that the two together generate a more honest devotion, one that questions and believes, wrestles and trusts. The paradox doesn't diminish faith, it fertilizes it. Psychological and philosophical insight. At the individual level, Donald Winnicott described the transitional space, the in-between where inner reality and outer reality blur. A child's teddy bear is both me and not me. This paradox is where play and creativity are born. Adults, too, need such spaces, the fertile overlap where doubt and certainty, hope and despair, mingle and make something new. At the group level, research on creativity shows that diverse, even conflicting perspectives, produce more innovative solutions than uniform groups. The tension between opposites, tradition versus change, caution versus risk, doesn't paralyze if it is held, it sparks. Some of humanity's greatest discoveries emerged not by erasing contradiction, but by dwelling in it. Think of art movements born from political turmoil, or scientific breakthroughs forged in debate. At the societal level, paradox shapes cultures. Ancient tragedy thrived on contradiction, fate and freedom, love and destruction. Taoist philosophy reminds us that yin and yang aren't enemies but partners, each carrying the seed of the other, each creating balance. Cultures that embrace this paradox generate richness and resilience. Cultures that suppress it grow brittle and stagnant. The lesson across all levels, the in-between is not a deadlock, it is a fertile space. Embodiment prompt or practice bring to mind a paradox you're living now. Instead of rushing to solve it, write down 3 new possibilities that belong only to the overlap between the two poles. Don't force them to be practical. Let them be creative, playful, even strange. Notice what emerges in the middle ground. Insight prompt. What if the contradiction you fear most isn't blocking you, but gestating something? What could the fertile in-between be growing in your life right now? Integration moment. The space between opposites is not emptiness. It is where life generates. Paradox is not only something to survive, but a place to create. When we learn to sit in the fertile in-between, we discover possibilities larger than either. Seed to plant. The space you fear as indecision may be the ground where your next transformation is already growing. Paradox in relationship. Paradox doesn't only live inside us, it lives between us. Every relationship is woven with contradictions. The longing for closeness and the need for distance, the desire to be seen and the fear of exposure, the pull toward trust and the instinct for self-protection. To be in a relationship is to live inside a paradox, and our ability to hold these tensions often determines whether love, friendship, and community grow or collapse. Themes closeness and distance. We crave intimacy yet fear losing ourselves in it. Trust and protection. To open is to risk harm, yet without opening, love cannot live. Belonging and freedom. Relationships require commitment, but also space to remain whole. Dialogue of opposites. Healthy relationships don't eliminate paradox, they hold it. Attributes. Vulnerability. Opening to paradox requires courage to be hurt and still be present. Boundaries. Distance protects individuality without rejecting intimacy. Flexibility, relationships stretch and contract as paradox demands. Authenticity, paradox reveals what's real, not what's polished. The mirror of two truths. Imagine standing before a mirror that reflects two images at once. One of you reaching out, one of you pulling back. Both are true. Relationship is that mirror. It shows us our paradoxes not in isolation, but in motion with another. The most difficult and most transformative paradoxes I've known have been in relationships. Wanting to be known completely, while fearing that if I showed too much, I'd be rejected. Longing to merge with someone, while fighting to keep hold of myself. I've come to see that relationships aren't about resolving these tensions once and for all. They are about learning to hold them together. Love is strongest not when it erases paradox, but when it makes room for it. When relationships collapse, it is often because the paradox was denied. One person demands certainty, while the other is pulled by doubt. One seeks closeness, the other needs space. Without the ability to hold the contradiction, the bond frays. But when paradox is honored, when both sides are recognized as real, something deeper emerges. Personal reflection. In my inner child was broken. I wrote about the wounds of childhood, the paradox of needing parents for safety while fearing their unpredictability. That same tension carried into adulthood, craving intimacy, but fearing the cost of dependence. Relationships forced me to face this paradox again and again. In the Inversiverse, I noticed how society shapes relational paradoxes. Safety is sold as control, intimacy framed as possession. We are told love means certainty, that doubt means weakness. Yet in truth, love lives in paradox, in the tension between trust and risk, freedom and belonging. And in the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe, when I spoke about envy, lust, anger, and shame, each shadow emotion played out most powerfully in relationships. The paradoxes were everywhere, wanting what others had while resenting them for it, desiring intimacy while fearing exposure, protecting myself through anger while longing to be comforted. Relationships revealed a paradox in real time, in ways I couldn't escape. What I've learned is this: relationships are paradox embodied. To remain in them is to learn to stretch without breaking. Psychological and philosophical insight. At the individual level, attachment theory captures this paradox perfectly. The anxious partner craves closeness, fearing abandonment. The avoidant partner fears engulfment, craving space. Both are true, both are human. When they meet, paradox emerges, the push-pull dance of intimacy. Healing doesn't come by erasing one pole, but by recognizing the paradox as part of love. At the group level, Martin Buber's philosophy of I, thou shows that true encounter requires paradox. We see the other as both like us and utterly different. Groups that deny this, forcing sameness or rigid boundaries, collapse into conformity or division. Groups that can hold the paradox of unity and difference create real community. At the societal level, relational paradox plays out in freedom versus belonging. Nations demand loyalty while promising liberty. Communities invite identity but risk exclusion. The paradox can fracture societies when denied, but it can also create resilience when embraced. Think of democratic debates, messy, contradictory, yet fertile when held. Across these levels, paradox in relationship isn't a bug. It is the fabric. Embodiment, prompt, or practice bring to mind someone close to you. Notice the paradox they evoke in you: closeness and distance, trust and fear, freedom and belonging. Breathe into both truths, whisper silently, both are real. Both belong in this relationship. Insight prompt: what paradox shows up most in your relationships right now? How would things shift if you stopped seeing it as a problem to fix and started seeing it as something to hold? Integration moment paradox in a relationship is not weakness, it is intimacy's depth. To love is to risk, to merge is to pull back, to belong is to balance freedom. Wholeness here is not certainty, but the capacity to remain in the mirror of two truths. Seed to plant every relationship is a paradox: closeness and distance, freedom and belonging. Don't rush to resolve it, learn to live inside it. Wholeness as holding. We've spent this journey seeing paradox as weight, as tension, as path, as fertile ground, as the mirror between people. But what does it all mean for wholeness? Many of us assume wholeness is clarity, a final resolution, a neat harmony where contradictions dissolve. But life teaches otherwise. Wholeness isn't the absence of paradox. It is the capacity to hold it. Themes wholeness as capacity. To be whole is not to be free of contradiction, but to have room enough for it. Integration without collapse. Opposites don't have to cancel. They can coexist within a larger container. Wholeness as dynamic paradox keeps us alive, fluid, adaptive. Wholeness isn't a fixed state, but a living balance. Beyond resolution, sometimes the deepest peace comes not from answers, but from holding contradictions gently. Attributes container. Wholeness is the vessel large enough to carry contradictions. Strength. Paradox does not shatter us when we have space to hold it. Flexibility. Wholeness bends without breaking, like bamboo in the wind. Mystery. Paradox reminds us that life is larger than logic. The vessel that holds both. Imagine a clay vessel. Inside it rests water and fire, side by side. Left alone, they would destroy each other. But within the vessel, both can be carried. The vessel is wholeness, not erasing contradiction, but holding it. For much of my life, I thought being whole meant cleaning up the mess inside, eliminating contradictions, resolving tensions, and finding one final truth. But the older I've grown, the more I see that wholeness is less about purity and more about capacity. It's not about silencing paradox, but about carrying it without collapse. To be whole is to be stretched wide enough for doubt and faith, fear and courage, grief and joy, love and loss. The paradoxes don't weaken me. They give me depth. They show me that life isn't a puzzle to be solved, but a mystery to be carried. Personal reflection. I've felt this most when facing contradictions I couldn't resolve. Times when I was both confident and unsure. Times when I longed for closeness and feared it. Times when I wanted freedom and belonging all at once. In the past, I thought these tensions meant I was fractured. But over time, I began to see them differently. They weren't cracks in me. They were part of my wholeness, the proof that I was wide enough to hold what couldn't be simplified. I remember realizing that the most alive people I've known were the ones who didn't hide their paradoxes. They carried them, laughed at them, let them be. They weren't broken for having contradictions. They were whole because they could hold them. Psychological and philosophical insight. At the individual level, Jung spoke of individuation as the process of integrating opposites, not erasing the shadow, but bringing it into consciousness. Wholeness means we are large enough for both light and dark. At the group level, paradox is essential for the community. Groups that pretend to be unified by eliminating differences grow brittle. But those that hold paradox, honoring both individual voices and collective identity, cultivate resilience. Wholeness in groups is the capacity to hold contradiction without collapse. At the societal level, mysticism across traditions affirms paradox as the heart of wisdom. Taoism embraces yin and yang. Christian mystics spoke of the union of opposites, death and resurrection, suffering and joy. Sufi poets sang of longing and fulfillment braided together. A society that makes room for paradox becomes whole. One that denies it fractures itself. Across all levels, the truth stands. Wholeness is not resolution. It is holding, embodiment, prompt, or practice. Close your eyes and imagine yourself as a vessel. Into your body, place one paradox you are carrying. Feel both sides alive within you. Whisper, I'm large enough to hold this. Notice how your body responds. Insight prompt, what paradox have you treated as a flaw in yourself? How would it change to see it as part of your wholeness? Integration moment wholeness is not about eliminating contradiction. It is about becoming a vessel wide enough to carry it. Paradox isn't what breaks us. It is what deepens us, shapes us, and makes us human. Seed to plant. You are not whole because your contradictions disappear. You are whole because you can hold them. Learning to hold paradox is not an error. It is the texture of life. From the weight of either, or to the stretch of tension, to the knots that bind, to the fertile in-between, to the mirrors of relationship, each paradox has been pointing us to the same truth, that wholeness is not resolution, but capacity. To live as a human being is to carry contradictions without collapse, to be stretched wide enough for opposites, and to discover that they don't cancel us, they complete us. Thank you for walking through these paradoxes with me. You've been listening to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. As always, stay unfiltered, stay human, and keep becoming. James Miller. If you found value in today's episode, you may also be interested in my broader project, The Inversiverse, a series exploring the hidden architecture of perception, identity, control, and consciousness. Across 20 episodes, The Inversiverse dissects indoctrination, language, media manipulation, dark psychology, belief systems, and the evolution of self in the digital age. You can find all episodes of The Inversiverse on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and Substack by searching this place called Earth. These ideas aren't shared to convince you, but to invite you to think, feel, and perceive more consciously in a world designed to keep you distracted. Overview of the Inversiverse. A journey through the mirrors of mind, culture, and control. Episodes 1 to 3. Introduce foundational ideas around indoctrination, perception, and manipulation. Episode 4. Explores how language, symbols, and cultural norms are used to shape thought. Episode 5. Investigates control systems, media narratives, and the illusion of choice. Episodes 6 to 7. Dives into collective belief structures and the psychology of mass behavior. Episode 8 focuses on marketing, control theory, game theory, and critical thinking. Episode 9 covers love, relationships, human mating, gender dynamics, and red-blue pill ideologies. Episode 10 unpacks dark psychology, the occult, Satanism, and the dark triad personality types. Episode 11 the simulated self examines identity, ego, and the rise of post-human consciousness. Episode 12 the spell of the mind inquires into language, illusion, and physiology of thought. Episode 13 conscious seduction, journeys through persuasion, propaganda, and the unseen forces of the mind. Episode 14, the myth of sanity sheds light on madness, genius, and the edge of perception. Episode 15, the algorithmic mind probes influence, identity, and invisible architects. Episode 16, the noise of knowing reveals overload, obsession, and the age of infinite information. Episode 17, belief machines delves further into language, desire, and the engine of reality. Episode 18, submerged signals examines how the unseen shapes the self. Episode 19, the alchemy within traces, food, frequency, and the forgotten intelligence of the body. Episode 20. Encoded flesh scrutinizes and opens up to the forgotten language of the body, DNA, and biological consciousness.